This is a presentation for Chapter 14, the Statement of Cash Flows. In Learning Objective 5, we are going to look at how the statement of cash flows using the indirect method can be prepared using a spreadsheet. So in the chapter, we've discussed the uses of the statement of cash flows in decision making and how to prepare the statement using T accounts. T accounts work well as a learning device in class. However, in practice, most companies face complex situations, and in these cases, a spreadsheet can really help in preparing the statement of cash flows. The spreadsheet starts with the beginning balance sheet and concludes with the ending balance sheet. The two middle columns, one for debit amounts and the other for credit amounts, complete the spreadsheet. These columns are labeled transaction analysis, and they hold the data for the statement of cash flows. Then the accountants can prepare the statement directly from the lower part of the spreadsheet. So let's look at the spreadsheet that is on this slide, and I will try to explain to you how this works. So we see on this in this column that we have all of the balance sheet accounts at 12/31/2023. Then we have all of the balances for the balance sheet at 12/31/2024. You reconcile the beginning to the ending balance depending on whether or not it is an increase or a decrease. So we can see that cash was $42,000 at the beginning of the year and $22,000 at the end of the year. So to decrease cash, you would credit cash. So that item would go in the credit column. Then let's look at accounts receivable. At the beginning of the year, accounts receivables was $73,000, and at the end of the year it was $90,000, which means that it increased by $17,000. So you would have a debit to accounts receivable for $17,000. You go through and you do the same type of analysis for all of your assets, liabilities, and owner's equity accounts. Then you have a letter beside each one of the transactions, each one of the amounts. These letters are going to correspond to an item in the bottom part of the spreadsheet where you will have the information to complete the statement of cash flows. So let's look first at retained earnings, and that will be a good one to illustrate how you use the spreadsheet. So we know from our earlier transaction analysis that retained earnings increased by $30,000. But there were two aspects to retained earnings. There was an increase of $40,000 for net income, and then a decrease for dividends. So when we go to the next slide, we're going to look for the entries that correspond to the $40,000 increase in retained earnings, which is A, and then the entries that correspond to the $10,000 decrease in retained earnings, which is labeled M. On this slide, we're looking at the bottom part of the spreadsheet. And as I said, each one of the debits or credits in the top of the spreadsheet will correspond to a debit or a credit in the bottom of the spreadsheet. And I pointed out about retained earnings. So let's see how the spreadsheet works. We know that the statement of cash flows begins with net income. We know that retained earnings increase with a credit for $40,000. So we will find in the bottom of the spreadsheet a corresponding debit for the same amount, and we will find that letter that links with the same letter in the top part of the spreadsheet. So in this case, it will correspond to the net income. That will be an increase in cash, a provision of cash in the cash flow statement. Now let's go down and let's find the corresponding letter M, which was the dividends that decrease retained earnings. So when you decrease retained earnings, you have a debit. On the bottom part of the spreadsheet, that M corresponds to cash payments for dividends. So cash payments for dividends is $10,000, and that would be a corresponding credit because a payment of dividends is a use of cash, which would be a credit. And we can see the M that corresponds with the M at the top of the spreadsheet. After we have completed both sides, debits and credits, at the top and the bottom, we total both columns, and both of these columns must equal. From this information that we have gotten on the bottom of the spreadsheet, we can easily complete the statement of cash flows. And that is the conclusion of the demonstration for Learning Objective 5.